As far as Dragon Quest goes, 8 is now second. My new favorite game is Dragon Quest 11.
That doesn't rhyme.
Dragon Quest XI opens with a familiar tale of tragedy and that small lining of hope we find wrapped around it. Ominous meetings, monsters swarming a kingdom, and the separation of a family are followed by the safety of its survivor, the warmth of a kind old man, and the feeling that things will be alright. A few years pass, and the establishing shot of our world and our main character is a slow zoom out of a marked hand holding an orange bandana as Yggdrasil floats in the distance. Ooh, that's for me! It's time for your coming of age ceremony, and that means scaling the cobblestone tour to witness the site at its summit. The path is full of monsters, and upon reaching the top, a giant bird does its best to claim your friend Gemma as its next victim. Unbeknownst to all present, it picked the wrong mountain to terrorize. A breathtaking shot of the ocean and one awkward conversation with your mother later, and it's revealed that you are the reincarnation of the Luminary, a hero born alongside the Return of the Dark One and chosen by Yggdrasil as the champion of light. You also learn that you're adopted, which personally I feel is poor timing by Mom over here, though I suppose the shock of such a revelation was intentional. That never gets old. In search of answers, you make your way to the kingdom of Heliodor, based on the good faith your old grandpappy had. If there's anyone that can point you in the right direction to meeting your destiny, it's King Carnelian. You make your way through the foothills, scale the enormous city before you, and are ushered into an audience with him. King Carnelian, however, has a different take on the Luminary.
Hendrik! Take this cur, and cast him into the furthest corner of the dungeon.
You'd think, this being Dragon Quest, that there'd be more concrete in this opening cutscene. Names of people, kingdoms, some kind of sentence about prophecy. This fresh ambiguity had a purpose. Sometimes we don't have all the answers in order to make the most well-informed decisions, and that's a problem we all have to face head-on. More importantly, it was a setup. We're so used to stories that play out exactly how we expect them to in Dragon Quest. Discover we're chosen, calamity, seek out drunken royal authorities to help us on our way. King Carnelian's betrayal is a subversion of that expectation, and the somewhat harsh reality that things don't always go the way we expect them to. But non-desirable outcomes sometimes lead us to wonderful things and our greatest allies.
The name's Eric, by the way.
The juxtaposition of an orange bandana, an iconic piece of the Dragon Quest VIII character's outfit, and Yggdrasil, the focal point of Dragon Quest IX's narrative, is more than a reference. With the console and handheld game serving as two separate identities for what Dragon Quest could become, 11 was standing at a fork in the road, and it was decided, why not both? Dragon Quest XI has two versions, a handheld version reminiscent of Dragon Quest IX, and a console version like Dragon Quest VIII. This shot is more than just fan service, it's a statement. We will take the best qualities of both and combine them. We will redefine this series just like we did 14 years ago, for veteran audiences and new fans. That's a bit more than just mindless speculation. On the subject of 11, Hori told Verge that it's essentially a culmination of the series, but I also wanted this game to serve as a new starting point too. And like a call from heaven, that torch is passed down not with fire, but with lightning. Meet Dragon Quest XI's fresh-faced director, Takashi Uchikawa.
それがしは内川でござる。よろしくお願いします。
Our man Uchikawa-san was no stranger to Dragon Quest. He's been a huge fan since a child. His goal when beginning his career at Square Enix was to one day direct the mainline Dragon Quest, and he came one step closer after being brought on as Hori's scenario assistant for Dragon Quest IX. Following that, he was involved in designing Dragon Quest Monsters Joker 2 as scenario and battle coordinator. Oh, that's a long title. How do you fit that on a resume? And then his time came. Dragon Quest XI was in need of a director, and they shoved it into Uchikawa's eager hands. I bet his heart stopped and he crapped his pants right there in the office when he found out. I know I would have. Personally, I've come to like Uchikawa a whole lot. Please don't deny war crimes. Please don't deny war crimes. Please don't deny war crimes. And it's looking like the torch may have finally passed into the hands of a younger perspective that loves the series with as much passion as fans do. I'd like to show that to you throughout the next hour? Oh, I keep getting worse at being succinct. It was up to Uchikawa's team to put that lightning back into the bottle and pull a very patient audience back in. They needed to wow the crowd and make a large enough impact on the modern JRPG landscape to remind everyone who the real powerhouses were. And the way they did it? Visual fidelity. In Hori's own words, technological advancements have given us a chance to showcase the world and present it in a more lively manner. The main character still responds in a binary fashion, but the world around him feels more alive. It shouldn't matter what the game ended up looking like, of course. I'd still be here losing my mind about it, but there's a certain minimal graphical quality that Dragon Quest benefits from. Dragon Quest IX was painfully missing much of the expression and emotional impact Dragon Quest VIII delivered with its mobile character models and animated faces. The return to a more two-dimensional perspective not only highlighted how powerful fully articulate 3D models in a Dragon Quest narrative were, but the resolution of the DS... Well, let's just clarify that for the Dragon Quest IX video, I had the footage emulated at 4 times the normal resolution. Natively, you might find yourself struggling to gain an emotional attachment, and you never notice how static the towns of Dragon Quest VIII were until you broke it down for its shortcomings, something you wouldn't normally get out of me. But this was an essential component of making Dragon Quest XI a bustling world full of diverse people, analyzing the choices made in the past and adapting those choices for the present. Stepping into Heliodor is like stumbling into a fantasy metropolis. NPCs in Dragon Quest XI move. They don't stand in place anymore. They cook, they play music, they dance. Some even have routines throughout the day and take their own route around the city. These animations were accompanied by an ambitious addition. Every single NPC had their own appearance based on body and head shape, hairstyle, eyes, nose, and clothing. They all looked different. The NPC types of the past Dragon Quest games were gone, and in its place, hundreds of individuals. And I know what you're thinking. Oh god, hundreds of NPCs in a big town? I'm gonna spend hours talking to all of them and remembering what they said, and it'll never be over. I'll spend so much time on it, my wife will leave me, the alimony's gonna pile up, and I'll have to play my new favorite game from inside one of those special motels without the child blocks on the TVs! But no, 11's dev team foresaw this particular pitfall and color-coded the icons over NPC heads to denote flavor text and important hints, and made some NPCs impossible to talk to. Much like in the way Yakuza did it, many NPCs had white speech bubbles that popped up as you strolled by to add to the ambience of their location without cluttering the existing dialogue opportunities or slowing a player's progress when exploring. The decision to increase NPC volume in a town without also increasing the amount of dialogue opportunities was a clever move. Previously, players would be met with loading screens whenever they entered any of the buildings in town, but now there weren't any. Every town in Dragon Quest XI is presented to you seamlessly. You can look through windows into the insides of people's homes, let yourself in by swinging the door wide open, leaf through their private documents, and break their sentimental pottery for the baubles inside as they helplessly look on in terror. And you can do it all over again to a different family without any downtime. Without those loading screens, towns gave off the impression of having a lot more space, so throwing down more townspeople to give life to those spaces was the right move. But why build wide when they could also build tall? Don't just scale the stairs, scale the rooftops, find ladders, climb over stacks of boxes and barrels, or jump off even higher platforms to get to more items and gain access to other parts of town. Go into one building, find a second floor that leads to a roof, and then jump down a chimney into a locked room. Find secret perches or hard-to-reach balconies and figure out the means to reach them. I've always said that exploring towns makes up half of the fun of traversing Dragon Quest worlds, and in 11's vertical and uninterrupted space, you barreled through buildings and swept items off the streets like a kid clambering around a jungle gym. You felt like a tourist, a very intrusive tourist, taking in the sights and personal belongings. You were an adventurer stepping into the center of vastly unique towns with their own special landmarks, where the citizens spoke in their own special dialect and possessed different accents, with different situations and focuses. Places like Gallipolis, the city of entertainment, Gondolia, merchant capital of the world, and Honolulu, a simple fishing town with a crazy lady firing cannons into the ocean. It wasn't just about the NPCs and the kings and leaders of the crowds anymore. Hori's intent was to pay homage to an earlier Dragon Quest. That all links back to one of the big themes of Dragon Quest III, of being able to travel around the world. It's not so much a copy of the setup, but more the same idea behind it, of having the world feel real through a variety of countries and people. The towns themselves had become characters, with different means of exploring them and colorful personalities to match. In the world of Dragon Quest XI, you wholeheartedly felt like a globetrotter and were excited to advance in the narrative in order to see what new architecture was in store for you. Once you've helped Eric with some unfinished business,
Wow, nice place you got here.
Welcome, welcome. Feel free to browse. You'll find we only stock the very finest wares.
That's good, because I'm looking for
The very finest wares.
the two of you head back to Cobblestone to find it in ruins. Found guilty of harboring the Darkspawn, the child of light who brings with them the coming of calamity, King Carnelian ordered it razed to the ground. All hope seems lost until space-time shenanigans, and you find yourself in the past, face to face with the man who found you years ago. After explaining what's happened, he instructs you to visit Heliodor Falls, and beneath a three-sided rock, you discover a chest containing a keystone that opens the door of departure. By the skin of your teeth, you manage to reach the door and escape the clutches of the King's Guard Captain Hendrik, allowing you to search the world for the answers you need. In the new distant land of Oughta, you encounter two sorcerers from Arborea, the twin sisters, Serena and Veronica, who swear allegiance to the Luminary and are charged with escorting them to meet Yggdrasil and help them destroy the Dark One. After obligatory episodic gameplay sequence, the now full-fledged party learns that the Sultan of Gallipolis possesses a branch from Yggdrasil herself, capable of forging a path to the World Tree. With your next destination determined and a goal set in place, you finally embark on your quest. That's the rough synopsis, but keep in mind these key details. The parting words your grandfather leaves you.
Remember now, don't waste your time bearing grudges, and live life with love in your heart.
Knowing that Eric's revenge turns out to be a reconciliation with his friend Dirk.
Okay. I'm sorry. I'm sorry I doubted you, partner.
That's the spirit. Eric, old pal, it's so good to have you back.
And, unlike most Dragon Quest games where revenge is a starting motivator for the narrative, the starting motivator for Dragon Quest XI's plot is understanding. Upon escaping Hendrik, your next course of action isn't make my way back to Heliodor to set the record straight. It's, I need to find the answers about myself. Heliodor only provided you with more questions, but keeping grudges won't give you the answers you're looking for. It was time to accept what's happened, and with your feet facing forward, explore new horizons to discover your destiny. In Dragon Quest XI, you travel to all sorts of different places, and the journey was as gratifying as the destination. Dragon Quest XI's overworld was full of life, rife with treasure, and a joy to navigate. Let's talk about open worlds and traversing them. Sometimes it sucks. It's a standard complaint due to how arbitrarily big some open worlds can be. Dragon Quest XI avoided this problem in a variety of ways. It kept areas from being too large, opting to minimize the space players were going to have to walk through. Then, it applied the same principles with its town design into the overworld itself. Geographical differences between regions created different patterns of movement for players. Today you're walking through a vast, open desert. Tomorrow, a narrow creek with limited footing, and the next, a wooded farmland once home to a great kingdom. Within that smaller scale, each region built upon the world. The ruins of Svardrust, the ancient structures in the Gallipolian desert, and the abandoned homes on the outskirts of Dundrasil gravitated you towards progress, treasure, and other items. Each part of this overworld was just as unique as the people and towns in it, and the constant eye candy kept players obsessed with checking every corner. Only this time, almost every corner yielded some kind of reward for having checked it. But these long stretches of nothing soured the near-perfect equation level 5 had been building. No treasure chests sprinkled about this world that was ripe for them. Material locations you found weren't marked on the map. Backtracking to pick them up was a nightmare. Sorry, I just like being validated. Dragon Quest XI made movement itself an enjoyable experience. No, I'm not talking about the jump button, but while I am, check it out, we can jump now. Isn't that cool? It's really overdue, but it's cool, right? The sprint button is a big help too, but that's only in the global release of the game, so it doesn't apply to all versions. Great addition though, seriously. Okay, so this may be the last time I get to say this, so say it with me. For the first time in the series, it's possible to ride the monsters of Dragon Quest to reach parts of the overworld you otherwise wouldn't have access to. Golden sparkle monsters walking around the world can be battled and their mounts stolen to ride over water, climb cliff sides, or even clear away rubble to reveal new areas with different monsters and more treasure chests. This helped change how players navigated areas. The means of exploration changing in different regions solidified the sense that no two areas were the same and kept each region fresh and novel. It signified the series finally understanding what made the exploration a pivotal part of going from A to B, breaking up the monotony. In addition to the monster mounting, well, forget it, that's what I called it, and that's what we're sticking to, figuratively speaking. In addition to the monster mounting, the overworld of Dragon Quest XI was full of treasure, resource spots, and a multitude of little touches to surprise its inhabitants with. Hidden crossbow targets were sprinkled across its landscape. Multiple paths made returning to areas more interesting, with different routes possessing different items or enemies. But sometimes the best way to mix up the pace of exploration is to give the player a chance to stop completely. In previous Dragon Quests, this meant returning to town, but it also meant you'd have to trudge through known sections again. Uchikawa's team acknowledged players' needs and cut out the middleman entirely, successfully removing one of the more annoying contrivances that had plagued the series. They added camps, a way to save your game, heal your party, and buy items without having to go through those repetitive motions. Camps dotted the landscape but were spaced out far enough to still create those treks of trials and tribulations, especially in dungeons. Because they were stationary, players were given a stronger sense of rest. Used to be you were spamming buttons and bumping into townsfolk. That's not a break. That doesn't sound like a break to me. That sounds more like having to run errands right in the middle of doing something fun. You sat in these camps and you realized how stressful it used to be to evac out, zoom to the town, run to the inn, run to the shops, run to the church, sometimes on opposite sides of the town, and then walk through the whole dungeon again. At a camp, the night falls. Soft music begins to play. Your party members huddle together by the fire and socialize. In that moment, everything stops. You can breathe, and for once, you don't have to worry about the what-ifs. What if I left right before a boss? What if my party wipes because I didn't go back to heal? What if I run out of storage space while I'm playing and my hard drive corrupts and I lose the footage to this great boss fight? Well, at that point, you give up and never finish your retrospective series. The point is, you finally had time to appreciate the progress you'd made, a cathartic moment of accepting all that had happened. But even now, the thought pours into your mind.
GC is such a pretentious dirtbag.
Okay, fair, but the thought after that, the one that begs the question, how can this really be such a significant break? This whole process would take a few seconds, so how would it genuinely create enough time for players to get into a form of relaxation? Because camps were a new location to conduct a new form of alchemy. Moving alchemy away from its static location in 9, but keeping players from accessing it freely like in 8 was a smart change that gave the process of alchemy proper significance. For one, it kept players from constantly looking at their inventories. This was a nasty habit that created tedium and slowed down progress as players checked and double-checked for alchemy ingredients. For another, it allowed players to access alchemy in places they previously couldn't. Because even dungeons had camps, players had even less reason to throw away their progress now. This was a power move that added a huge deal of agency to Dragon Quest and restructured the gameplay loop. forward momentum was maintained without forcing the player to be in a constant and repetitive state of motion. Alchemy itself was completely reworked in Dragon Quest XI, and it's the best it's ever been. You're gonna hear that a lot. It might as well be the tagline of the game. Using recipes was now mandatory. Losing the ability to mix and match ingredients manually to acquire powerful gear early was a slight bummer, but this change ultimately increased the desire to search bookshelves for new recipes, which resulted in players reading a lot more flavor text and engrossing themselves in the lore of the world. And it became a fully fledged minigame of its own. Why do I have so many live-action cutaways in this section?
Behold, the fun-size forge. Pop a few raw materials on top, bash them with the porta pounder, and behold, new equipment.
Depending on the item you were forging, a pattern would form separated into a grid of squares. Each square represented one part of the item and had a meter attached with a sweet spot highlighted in green. The goal of forging was to hammer those squares and aim for each sweet spot. The more sweet spots you managed to hit, the better quality of item you made. But it wasn't so simple. Each bash of your hammer used up a certain amount of focus, and once you were out of focus, you were done. For better or worse. Failing to create an item from scratch wasn't an option. Even if you did screw it up big time, that item was yours. Any forging deemed a success, though, gave you perfectionist pearls that you could then use to rework your equipment. Forging made alchemy an activity to look forward to, and a diversion from the core gameplay much in the same way monster taming was in earlier Dragon Quests. It was a breather that still served what you were in the middle of doing, giving you a slower pace to ruminate as you pumped and primed your gear for the boss fight ahead. And it wasn't a one-dimensional feature that became tedious over time. The better the gear, the harder it was to create. You had to watch the temperature of the forge as well, since each bash made the forge colder and your bashes weaker. And to top it off, the more powerful equipment possessed the possibility of popping off surprise conditions while you were working on them. These ranged from lowering the condition of squares on the grid to increasing the focus cost of your next bash for an added critical hit chance. Your skill in forging grew alongside your main character's combat level, so the stronger you became, the more focus you had at your disposal and the more special techniques you developed. Things like reheating the forge to keep the strength of your bashes up, double whammies that contained the strength of 2 bashes for less focus, and bashes that covered greater surface areas were a necessity for later recipes. I've come up with a new recipe! That's the wrong series. This was a great way to balance out the possible gear you could end up having at certain points in the game without making it impossible for more savvy players to skillfully manipulate the forge at lower levels for advantageous equipment. You could try to forge a +3 weapon for a large boost to your stats, or fail spectacularly and still receive a weapon with marginally better attack power than your current weapon, but lose the ingredients and therefore have to spend perfectionist pearls to rework it up to +3 instead. And unlike your first time forging items, failing at reworking them meant no upgrade and a loss of pearls. This management of resources made alchemy less of a quick-as-you-can mechanic and one that required more consideration for timing. Maybe it'd be better to hold on to those pearls for a better item you might find. Maybe wait a couple of levels to ensure a perfect forging for a cheaper way to get those bigger boosts. Maybe you could use the smaller boosts or those status ailment protections right now, or maybe you're feeling confident about your forging technique. With forge items becoming more difficult to successfully make as your repertoire of flourishes and capacity to focus grew, alchemy in Dragon Quest XI became a series of puzzles to solve. Almost its own side quest that you slowly chipped away at over the course of the game, the outcome of which affected how players would equip their party and behave in battle. Speaking of side quests, those are back too. And thankfully, a lot better. Side quests in Dragon Quest IX were tedious, arbitrarily convoluted, and unnecessarily specific. Side quests don't need to be easy or consisting of short-term goals, but if Uchikawa's team wanted to address the flaws of side quests past, a more concentrated set of objectives was needed. In 11, they had the sense to keep any important or significantly game-changing items out of possible side quest rewards. They also removed the limitation of only being able to take one side quest at a time. With these changes, side quests came off as extra challenges you could take with tantalizing rewards like new alchemy recipes or special gear, only without the bizarre restrictions Dragon Quest IX placed upon you for seemingly no reason. They were able to be completed at your leisure, and instead of the reward being some piece of locked content like a new job class or crazy dungeon, The objectives of these side quests pointed you in the direction of mechanics or content you might not have realized existed. It helped that side quests which were able to be accessed became active in your menu with directions on how to start them as well. This is the real power of side quests and challenges, not unlocking new content by rewarding it, but exposing players to said content by nature. Take, for instance, this casino side quest, pointing me in the direction of a second casino I didn't know existed. You had to win the jackpot on roulette though. I don't know, that seems pretty hard. Putting my flex aside, side quests, alchemy, and overworld exploration belong to a greater spread of those secondary features we came to expect and enjoy from Dragon Quest. In 11, our old favorites make a return shiny and polished, bringing with them new ideas and new activities. New to the casinos was Slime Quest, a slightly different take on slot machines that mixed in elements of pachinko and allowed manual stopping of slot reels. Slime Quest had a fun visual novelty with lots of special reels and win conditions. Winning reliably, however, depended on keeping a close eye on the machine payouts and odds. In Dragon Quest XI, casino employees filled you in on which machines were paying out, which machines just finished dispensing jackpots, and the assorted odds each machine had. These were always changing, so biding your time for better odds and higher payouts was a way of playing against the chance nature of the casinos. You could also slight this poor man who spent all night on his stack of cards. Just as flimsy as the marriage that drove you here, Randy. Our wonderful mini-medals were in full effect. Did they use a progression system this time where collecting a certain amount of mini-medals earned you prizes, or the shop version where you spent medals on a selection of rare items? Yes. Once you cleared the mini-medal track, the mini-medal shop became available, with new alchemy recipes and rare alchemy ingredients for purchase. Mini-medals were in large abundance now, so there was no need to worry about not finding them all. Some enemies could drop them, and other activities practically gave them away late game. You would complete your book of medals and open the shop eventually. Dragon Quest XI also added horse racing to its repertoire. Yeah, horse racing. I know, right out of left field. I don't understand whose idea that was. I think someone's gambling addiction has gotten worse. Each race got progressively more difficult and challenging, requiring you to balance your horse's stamina against various stamina pickups and obstacles. The longer you could keep your horse sprinting, the more distance you could build between you and the other racers. What horse racing lacked was variety in its stages. Of the 5 you could eventually race in, only one had a gimmick beyond being a different shape than the others. Otherwise, it was always the same location, the same obstacles, and the same tricks to get ahead. The shape of the tracks didn't change drastically enough to make each race feel all that different. More would only unlock after plot progression 2, meaning you'd have to awkwardly check in to see if there was a new track you could spend 5 to 10 minutes on. It was a ton of fun, but short-lived in a 100-hour RPG. And speaking of short-lived, let's talk about what isn't in Dragon Quest XI and how they retooled the ideas behind them. I'm a big mad baby because they didn't put monster taming in the game. This overworld was huge and detailed. I mean, look, the enemies on the map have behavioral patterns depending on the time of day and weather. With the ability to get this specific with enemy behavior on maps as geographically diverse as this, the presence of infamous monsters or even special bosses was sorely missed. You fight some of these designs and wish you could tame them. You walk into these beautiful clearings and your only thought was, oh, this would have been a perfect place for a boss fight. There was still something that invoked the spirit of the monster arena though, the Wheel of Harma. The Wheel of Harma is a series of challenges of varying rank that pit you against different groups of monsters and oh, that sounds familiar. Without monster taming, it was your party that needed to face the challenges of the wheel, but with a twist. You had to select which party members were going to attempt each part of the gauntlet before you started. And to make things more interesting, your performance wasn't graded on whether or not you completed each rank, but on the number of turns it took you to finish. Kinda like sex. Because you had total control over your party in these trials, the monsters you faced weren't so cut and dry. There were multiple solutions to winning, especially under the turn limits you were trying to avoid reaching. You just had to be clever and use your party intelligently. The Wheel of Harma might not have been the monster arena we love, but the principles were the same. Understanding the challenges in front of you and knowing how to utilize the options you had when forming teams for each battle. It was invigorating when you were able to solve one, only to get hung on the next in the trial and have to brainstorm that for a while. And after finally figuring out a combination of party members and moves to beat all the battles in one trial, think of a way to complete the whole thing in under a certain amount of turns. It was all about optimizing your playstyle against particular enemies. Once you could beat them consistently, you felt like a master strategist. Like horse racing though, the Wheel of Harma wasn't something you could access alongside the main path and jump back to when you felt strong enough to beat one of the ranks. You didn't unlock the Wheel of Harma until at least 70 hours in, and I'm being generous. That was something the Monster Arena brought to the deviations of Dragon Quest that went missing in 11. Cohesion. With all the extra activities to do in Dragon Quest XI, there wasn't a standout option for players looking for fun side stories or quest chains that built upon any one place or contributed to your overall experience in a big way. There were no stories about a saber cat and his busy master, no inns you could help upgrade over time, no men with Italian accents asking you to
Play with yourself, eh?
11's side content was opted to be bite-sized in the form of side quests and mini-medals, or isolated like the Wheel of Harma and the Casino. That's not to say Dragon Quest XI was missing that cohesion, only that for certain elements outside of the core components, there was little to anchor them together. In reality, Dragon Quest XI is almost assuredly the most cohesive of the bunch. Now, maybe missing some golden oldies, but it could never be without our favorite traditions. Time to boat in Dragon Quest XI is about 17 hours depending on your circumstances, and for you, the circumstances were about to get fabulous.
Who, me? Don't be ridiculous, darling. I'm just a silly old jester.
In Gallopolis, the party meets the kingdom's prince, who desperately asks for their assistance in the coming horse race, marking his coming of age. Fearing the fallout if he fails to win and revealing he has shirked his training, he offers the rainbow in return for your help. Disguising yourself in his riding gear, you participate as the prince's double, winning the competition and the attention of the great Sylvando.
Wait, don't tell me you were... Surely you didn't let your understudy take the stage for the command performance? Oh, this is too good!
An exchange about ideals later and the consequences of the prince's actions bear fruit. Before you can receive your reward, an accursed creature known to the kingdom as the Slayer of the Sands attacks Gallopolis. Prince Ferris's worst nightmare is made reality when his father, the Sultan, charges him with defeating the beast.
Please, I beg of you, the Slayer of the Sands will tear me limb from limb unless you aid me. Have pity on a desperate soul. Oh.
Sylvando's kindness and curiosity convinces him to assist you.
Look, I'm worried about the half-wit prince getting himself killed. Can I come with you or not? At least one of you has some sense. Lead on, darling!
Together, you journey to the Celestial Sands and make camp for the night, where Sylvando learns about your journey.
My, meow. So there's a dastardly villain coming to steal all the smiles and laughter from the world.
You vanquished the Slayer of the Sands, returned to Gallopolis, and a certain prince learned a certain lesson about resolve.
Repeat after me now. A knight's word?
A knight's word is his bond, his kingdom, his master.
Well, don't stop.
And after all of that, the search for the rainbow sent you across the sea to the city of Octagonia, with one problem. You didn't own a boat. Thankfully, a certain silly old jester was in possession of one, and had become quite enamored with your quest.
Oh, don't be coy, darling. I want to come with you, of course. You should never have told me about your heroic quest if you didn't want me to tag along.
What are you talking about? You can't just decide to come with us. This isn't a game.
The prince's plight is juvenile, but not without merit. A telltale result of fearing expectations and the consequences of the actions we take.
But the more I fulfilled them, the more their expectations grew. And now, finally, they expect the impossible. Ow, it's so unfair.
He's got half of the lesson we're focusing on today, and he's almost got it, but not quite. Note Fartface's deterrence in acknowledging his actions, despite understanding how he got himself into the situation. His fixation on his past choices steadily escalated his problem into something seemingly impossible to solve. Prince Farfuga is someone straddled by the weight on his shoulders, second-guessing his past so much that he cannot face the present. Rather than live with his choices, Fettuccini builds on his own lies. He chains down the consequences until they eventually come crashing down upon him, and he is faced with a choice he is absolutely paralyzed by. That is, until the great Sylvando reminds him of the knight's pledge.
He serves the weak untiringly, challenges the strong unflinchingly, and never retreats in the face of adversity.
The Knight's Pledge complements Old Chalky's advice about living life with love in your heart and not bearing grudges, to face down the challenges ahead of you without hesitation, to live by your word, to act with resolve. But even the great Sylvando, with his strength and living in the present, has a past he isn't exactly all that satisfied with.
What about you, Sylvando? What made you leave home and set out on the road?
Oh, you don't want to hear my boring old stories. We've got a big day ahead of us tomorrow. Come on, kiddies. Betty buys.
This isn't to shut down the ideal Sylvando upholds. It's meant to display that everyone at any point in their lives, regardless of circumstance, is faced with difficult decisions and the sense of regret or unknown that comes with not taking the other option. With access to a boat, Dragon Quest XI remained a linear experience. We were stuck behind a floodgate. This was a smart move, though.
Didn't you complain about this in your Dragon Quest VI video?
It's different. Dragon Quest VI was this messy, poopy narrative that said no to you without reason. It landlocked you after making the promise of open waters. Dragon Quest XI was focused, pointing you directly to areas you could dock at within the space you could sail, and made it clear what your destination was. The floodgate didn't matter because players had enough information about their next goal before getting the boat. That limited space made sense. No promises were made. Clarity was obtained. Bad. Good. Poopy game. Good game. Ew. Yay. The rest of the sea was open to you, and it was clear that vehicle traversal had changed significantly. The ability to dock anywhere was reduced to only specific points on the map, labeled by anchors and bird-eagle symbols? I forgot what they looked like, and I'm too lazy to check. Hey, don't look at me like that. This was disappointing to discover, but it made sense given how much bigger the overworld of Dragon Quest XI was and how you were meant to explore it. Having anchor points for players to start from limited the problem of stumbling onto a camp too soon for it to be practical. It also gave the level design more freedom to create the diverse geography in each area you went to. Without those anchor points, areas would have had to have been flatter to compensate for players being able to dock anywhere, a problem avoided by older entries expressing terrain on a flat 2D plane, and a problem later entries exhibited by having one type of traversable region. Green, with the trees, maybe some beige, a cow once in a while. Hey, check it out, I'm like Bob Ross. All those routes and fun architecture would be lost in a world built towards that old convenience. There was a balancing act going on. Convenience is removed to open the way for new ideas and important quality of life additions that simplify traditional experiences to build upon existing mechanics. For veterans of the series, this would be most evident in Dragon Quest XI's combat. Combat in 11 had been fine-tuned into a beautiful spectacle of quick thinking and adaptive strategy. Enemies of the same type were now appropriately grouped together. No more two slimes sandwiched between a couple of bunnies. If it's the same enemy type, they were all targetable together. This simplification increased the value of group targeting abilities and expedited battles that previously ran long in the tooth due to awkward targeting options. If you were using a boomerang or other weapon that hit multiple enemies, you could choose which individual enemy you wanted to start with in the chain. The weapon would start there and go to the right until it hit all the targets. This was another small change that gave players the flexibility to focus the weaker enemies in a group and manipulate the cascading damage intelligently. It helped maintain the advantages that enemies of the same type being in separate groups previously offered as well. You no longer needed to have equipment prepped in a character's inventory, as every party member had access to an equipment bag that stored all weapons, armor, and accessories. It was accessible in battle, making on-the-fly changes to your character's loadout easier. It also opened up space for more healing and special items in character inventories. Using the item still required that character to hold it though. This prevented players from abusing special effects in battle, creating a balance between inventories and the equipment bag. And there were two camera options for battles. The action camera allowed free movement, which let players create the illusion of tactical positioning. But that's all it was, an illusion. The action camera wasn't anything special. It took too much away from the speed of battles and lost its charm once you realized you couldn't actually dodge attacks with it. The classic option was the camera we're all familiar with, only this time with added camera angles and more cuts to make battles feel intense and provide better hit feedback on attacks. Those make up the extent of smaller improvements, but there's more to cover. Hori and Uchikawa weren't blind to the ideas of their peers. It'd be silly to build this new start for the series without being conscious of basic fundamentals other RPGs had introduced, and I quote, "The way we approached Dragon Quest XI was the idea that it needs to be approachable and ease of access, just making the game easier to play and easier to get into. Those kind of playability touches are things we have taken from other games. One of those staples being preemptive attacks in the overworld. This was straightforward, run up and slap the thing for bonus damage. It's worth understanding the real boon this mechanic added though. Removing the random battles from Dragon Quest was great, but to initiate combat, you just, you threw yourself at them like a carton of eggs at a brick wall. That's weird, right? There's no real interaction or feedback. This added them and created a compelling urge to smack as many monsters as you could. Whack, whack, whack. Monsters on the map cut out the anxiety of random battles. Preemptive swings transitioned the choice to battle into the urge to battle. More importantly, Dragon Quest XI, the console version at least, changed the way turns were taken in combat. You no longer pre-selected the entire party's actions all at once at the start of the round. Turns were now taken when it was that character's time to act. Alright, not a huge deal when you look at the general landscape of RPGs nowadays, but consider what that change meant for Dragon Quest. Previously, part of the strategy element was foreseeing damage before it happened. Heals you set up for that turn were taking into account potential damage you could receive before the heal went off, as well as whatever damage you took last turn. The shift in the way actions were taken pulled the Dragon Quest audience out of their comfort zones. In this series' case, people tend to play safely, and this leads players into the repetitive action many detractors of turn-based RPGs fall into, and rightly so. Fact is, turn-based RPGs can get really boring when you play it safe. But now you didn't need to play it safe. You couldn't, could ya? Serena won't be able to heal you until her turn comes up, so forget any just-in-case healing. And you could use your main character to heal right now, but that's going to waste an attack and Serena might have to heal anyway. Dragon Quest's combat had become more reactionary. It was now about acting in the moment. It went from being padded with whole rounds of healing to having a stronger flow that encouraged playing the character's strengths and taking more risks. A combat system like that was going to need a lot of dynamics. It needed an abundance of abilities to entice its players into taking the risks, and it had to create the circumstances that made exploring those characters necessary. And why reinvent the wheel when you already perfected it decades ago? Dragon Quest IV's party system was back and in full force. Like in 4, plenty of battles in 11 were having you switching between characters to gain an advantage. Sometimes you had no other choice. Throughout the narrative, your cast of party members were separated and rearranged, forcing you to learn the ins and outs of each of them, and discover some interesting combos in the process. To quote Uchikawa, "We didn't want a situation where players are ensured victory by using a particular character, and we wanted to avoid that type of strategy being generated." You could stack ailments with Sylvando and then have Eric capitalize by using his dagger skills to deal triple damage on poisoned enemies. But let's say Eric wasn't available or you had a different kind of strategy in mind. With Veronica instead, Sylvando could be used as a battery, buffing her to make her spells more powerful. Being able to switch out party members at the cost of a turn was a returning feature that further encouraged learning more combinations, and the alternating availability of your party members posed a nifty challenge to players that also opened their eyes to each character's potential. The setup and paying off of these combos was reminiscent of the same strategies revolving the Psych Up mechanic. Psyching Up was an enemy-exclusive function now, and a huge threat against your party when an enemy began to use it, but both players and enemies had an even greater ace up their sleeve, and it involved a new mechanic built off of the coup de grace from Dragon Quest IX, Pep Powers. Like coup de grace, Pep Powers triggered for all sorts of reasons. They were more than an opportunity to get off a powerful move though, much more. Characters that pepped up in battle could carry their pep over into other battles, and, if you wanted to, store that pep for later by removing the character from the active party. Why hold on to peps across multiple battles? For one, saving it for a tougher enemy was a smart move, but being pepped up also boosted all of that character's stats for its duration, which meant you weren't only waiting for the right time to use it, you were milking the buffs for what they were worth and rotating party members out to use them later. That pushed new combos into your lap and changed your strategy as the dynamic of battles shifted. Pep Powers didn't stop there, no. Pep Powers also required specific characters to be pepped up to use them, and there were no substitutions or repeat abilities between the party. Some of them could be used by one pepped up character as long as the other characters necessary were in the active party, but the majority of Pep Powers had their own special animations involving multiple pepped up party members, and did specific things based on their personalities or powers. An ability where the hero and Sylvando performed a daring circus act to rally everyone's attack power, a powerful healing sigil using Serena that cured all ailments and topped off health, and my personal favorite, turning Eric into a supercharged 2-turn having demon that could deal massive damage. Yeah, he's so cool, I love him! With Pep Powers, the balancing we love to talk about in Dragon Quest was given that much more depth without breaking those keep it simple design values the series adheres to. Players would end up with vastly different party configurations, trying to save up pep for their favorite powers, and use abilities or strategies they'd never consider otherwise. Every new party member acquired didn't just mean one more list of abilities to choose from. Every new party member meant more pep powers, more equipment to forge, more synergies to uncover, and more skill points to spend. And surprise, it's the best it's ever been! The skill point system returned! It looked at Dragon Quest IX's job system and said, no offense, but I don't like you. And then it beat the job system up and nuzzled itself into Dragon Quest's arms. But it had been some time since the skill point system wasn't sharing that embrace with some other mechanic. It was different, changed. I mean, butt stuff was completely out of the question, and they'd never agree on the viscosity of the latex anymore. Their relationship would never be the same way again. Because it was better! Gone were the days of dumping points into a stat on level up and unlocking things in a linear fashion. Introducing the skill point hexagon panel thingy. Yeah. Every character possessed their own skill panel grid, and on it were several sections dedicated to their equipable weapons and 1 or 2 personal traits. As a luminary, you had sections of the grid dedicated to your prophetic powers, but you also possessed a section in sword mastery that lay adjacent to sword and greatsword sections, for example. Instead of putting them into these categories, you spent skill points on panels adjacent to any panels you had already unlocked, starting from the center. The skill panel grid was a genius innovation that solved an issue with skill-based progression that not 11's contemporaries nor other games in general could: the begrudging linearity of unlocking new skills. Because all the panels were side by side on the grid, it was possible to build around the panels you didn't want to waste points on. If the first panel for swords didn't pique your fancy, you could take the one underneath it to get to the panels adjacent to them. If you wanted to rush down an entire section of dagger abilities for Eric to unlock dual wield, you could ignore all the excess panels that weren't going to get you to your goal. And finding the fastest path to those desired skills was often ideal. Some panels had passive abilities or flat stat bonuses regardless of weapon choice, making joint skill routes exceptionally powerful. With the grid in place, you weren't limited to whatever those skill trees had to offer. You could skip options you weren't going to use, pick up a couple passives from another tree on your way to something important, and because every panel had a specific cost associated with it, a balance was still able to be maintained. Given that pricing, one level up can net you multiple skills instead of one. Buy the cheaper panels you can afford on leveling up, or save your skill points for that big ability, but play with a limited skill set for the time being. The choice was yours, and options at your disposal were tempting. Not just because every panel could find a home in some player's combat lexicon, but also because panels were marked when they were components to unlocking brand new pep powers, or could surprise you with bonus skill points to further character development. With all these factors at play, it was difficult to find any party builds that were done exactly the same. Talking to friends who were playing alongside me, it was great discovering we had all gone down different paths. I took Eric down a boomerang dagger hybrid path, but someone else took him straight down swords instead. My luminary never touched great swords, but I had a friend that played his luminary exclusively with them. And if I had wanted to try out their builds for curiosity's sake, the process was simple. You could reallocate all of any and every character's points at any save location for a moderate amount of gold. You weren't being held down by the decisions you'd made in the past with the skill point system, just as you weren't trying to predict too far into the future in combat. Everything was built to convey a relaxed confidence, alternatively, an indomitable resolve. The moment-to-moment thinking, the attraction to risky actions, and the peace of mind knowing you had full control over the secondary functions made combat in Dragon Quest XI the kind of experience that left you smiling, sometimes smug over a satisfying success. Uchikawa put it the best. The core aspects I outlined to determine whether something is Dragon Quest-like are that it's easy to comprehend, generates a sense of comfort, and a sense of adventure that gets you excited. We would start by checking ideas against these three pillars and make a judgment call based on that. And it also made everything feel extremely easy. Let's review. Enemies were grouped together more often, making them easier to target. You had more inventory space for special or healing items and could equip whatever, whenever. You could deal bonus damage before a battle started, and because of that, you were getting into more fights more often, which means more XP for the party. Pep powers could carry over into other battles, and you had total freedom over every character's skill development. Yeah, when you put it that way, it's not surprising. In my case, it took a good 80 hours before I finally had my first party wipe. I had close calls up to that point, but nothing I couldn't handle. But wait, what if I told you that, in this case, easy was better? What if this is what Dragon Quest is when you trim the fat? When you create an environment for players to experiment? Fans of Dragon Quest are accustomed to remembering the tougher aspects of Dragon Quest battles. But you've been on this ride with me. We've covered every other single-player Dragon Quest game on this show, and the ones at the top of the list are some of the easier ones. The entries that played around with the fundamentals of its combat, the ones that added entirely new progression systems, the ones that had unorthodox party management. The Dragon Quest games with the most entertaining combat tend to be the easier ones. They strip away the humdrum rhythm of turn-based RPGs and add a personality to what players are doing. Because of that, players get invested in how they're utilizing the tools on hand, and instead of doing the bare minimum to succeed, get good at using them. And 11 takes those tools directly from these games. It takes the team-up concepts from 9, it takes the progression system from 8, and it takes the party system from 4. At the same time, it does away with old and frustrating design, instead adding incentive after incentive to engage in battles as often as possible and without fear of having to backtrack because of it. 11 so readily exposed you to new options and challenges that you quickly garnered a mastery over them. And for what it's worth, it's not that easy. Never having to heal is easy. Having the optimal strategy remain the same across every battle is easy. Being put into situations that ask you to play differently, having the materials to do that well, that's not easy, it's just good. It could also be that we've all amassed 1,000 hours playing these games and have become the equivalent of unleashing a pack of lions on a kindergarten class. But I'm a romantic, so stirring, impassioned speech it is. That wasn't the only adventurous aspect of Dragon Quest XI. Uchikawa might have been in charge of combat, but Yuji Horii was still the designer and scenario writer, and if I told you the narrative of Dragon Quest XI was full of unexpected twists, thought-provoking subtext that stuck with you, and endeavors into empathy previously unknown to the series, would you believe me? Because that's what I'm about to tell you. Not entirely sure how I'm supposed to go about this without using spoilers, but we'll cross that road when and if we get there. Dragon Quest XI's narrative stretches out over 120 hours and 3 different world states. Something that long was in danger of being slow, and worse, boring. Dragon Quest VII was a long tale that spanned roughly the same amount of time, and by God, that was exhausting. Horii has wisened up since then, like deciding to hire other writers to help with secondary dialogue kinds of wisened up. Up until Dragon Quest VIII, Horii had done every piece of text in the game by himself. But the master storyteller hadn't lost his edge. Despite its length, Dragon Quest XI had some of the best pacing of the series, along with some of its greatest takeaways, if not the greatest one. Like always, XI's narrative behaved like the collection of episodes Dragon Quest stories tend to be. Arriving to a new town was akin to the start of a new episode, but especially so in 11. Thanks to the way NPCs were now being designed, minor characters that previously would only be distinguishable by their named text box now possessed unique appearances. Even those tertiary characters that looked as if their appearances were made with those general assembly parts still stood out and were recognizable beside their neighbors. It gave an added sense of novelty to any story development. These were characters you'd remember for their stories, and they helped further modulate each new episode of the narrative. We really built out unique characters for Dragon Quest XI, and in that sense, even if people don't remember the story, we feel like the characters will really stick in their minds. 11 also introduced the structural blocking that 7 was lacking. Seasons. Structural block? This is why I don't talk about movies. I don't know what the hell I'm talking about. I'm a fraud. I'm a loser. I'm a joke. Nobody cares. 11 was a self-contained trilogy, with each figurative season marking a significant change in the state of the world, the state of your character, and of the enemies and towns you were visiting. Season 1 was about the assembling of the party, understanding your goal and the method you were going to complete it with. Season 2 was about getting to know that party, understanding their motivations, getting to know their interpersonal relationships, and marked a surprising shift in Dragon Quest's narrative tone. Season 1 lulls you into this false sense of security, like you're going to be playing through that good old typical Dragon Quest narrative, and then Horii rips that blanket away from you, disrupts that beautiful sense of triumph you were about to grasp, and squishes your heart with a soul-crushing scene. Yeesh, a far cry from the wholesome tales and distant melancholy we were used to. This was dire. This was messed up, and it didn't pull any punches from then on. Interviews with Horii and Uchikawa would stress how different the story they wanted to tell was, and admittedly, I doubted it. But Dragon Quest XI was different. It took narrative risks, went for calculated moments of melodrama, showed vulnerability in its characters, and knew how and when to brutally hit you with death, doubt, and an uneasy feeling that made you think, could I have done that better? And that's an intentional step Dragon Quest XI took into imparting its morsels of wisdom, not just telling you how to deal with a particular facet of living, but putting those feelings in your heart, taking you to that place in your mind and showing you what the sensation they were describing felt like. To many people, Dragon Quest XI is going to look like a drastic shift in storytelling for the series. It may seem like the darker elements within the story are an attempt at being gritty or intense. It's anything but. Really, a lot of the weight behind Dragon Quest XI's themes, and why so much of it pays homage and celebrates previous entries, comes from its lineage. It is the tale of father and child over the course of 30 years, a final chapter in one person's life marking the beginning of a new chapter in another's. And if you've played all the Dragon Quests up until now, you'll be surprised to discover you know that story pretty well. The year is 1986, and Dragon Quest I has just released in Japan for the Famicom. In it, players take on the role of the descendant of Erdrick, taking up his mantle, his weapons, his armor. You are tasked with defeating an evil like your ancestor before you, making the world a better place. This story begins with meeting expectations, properly carrying on in footsteps left before this fledgling adult about to take their first steps alone. Dragon Quest I is a solitary tale of unknowns, the beginning of one's independent life. In Dragon Quest II, that person finds others like them, people who are beginning their adventure after losing their parents or leaving the nest. Finding comfort in companionship, they form a bond. They work together to meet the pressures they found placed upon them head on. Unifying their resolve, Dragon Quest II marks this person's first moment of clarity, that they're not alone in this journey, that many people share their anxieties and mission. They find comfort in the companionship, maybe even fall in love once in a while, as they continue trying to make their ancestry proud. Until in Dragon Quest III, when it becomes clear that living in the shadow of their parents isn't enough. At this point, our protagonist has made many friends and learned a great deal about themselves in the process. They begin to fight their way out of their ancestor's shadow and emerge victorious, creating a legend of their own, and gaining the title of Erdrick in the process. From trying to honor Erdrick, to escaping his shadow, to becoming Erdrick themselves, our hero finally realizes the weight of their responsibility, what they will represent to their descendants, and the power they have in preparing them for their moment of actualization. Dragon Quest IV is that plan of preparation mechanically, as all the characters in the chapters leading up to the hero's introduction lay the groundwork for their success. Our protagonist in this odyssey is not the hero of Dragon Quest IV, but the rest of the party, having made all the necessary plans for the future of a child that may not even exist yet, but knowing that there will come a day when they are no longer able to help. And in Dragon Quest V, that fear is made tenfold when our hero loses their beloved father. That sudden realization of mortality and the grief in losing the man they so desperately fought to separate themselves from, it's earth-shattering. The protagonist of Dragon Quest has a second epiphany. They are not the chosen one. They are not the most important person in this world. This opens their mind to empathy and compassion. They are able to form deeper connections with their loved ones. They get married, they have children, and for our main character, their children are the chosen ones. Their children are who matter, who deserve to wear the mantle and the weapons and the armor. And so the son becomes the father and begins to truly appreciate all that was done for them. History begs to repeat itself, a possibility they are all too fearful of. Dragon Quest VI explores this identity crisis. Call it existential or call it a result of our new father reaching their middle age. Regardless, 6 discusses the duality of our hero. Someone of two minds split between their own desires and their responsibilities. The presence of two worlds representing fantasy and reality for the characters in it symbolize the struggle our father has in balancing these things. But the dual nature of the characters within those worlds also represent the father's relationship with their child. The person they want to be, who they used to be, past glories and old attitudes that held strongly onto childhood dreams, these fantasies of a different time are real in the minds of their child. But what may come to pass, the experience of hardships and the power of hindsight, this is the father's reality. Given the deconstruction of the fantasies within the game's narrative and what we know of the father's own experiences, we know all we need to of their choices in the matter. In Dragon Quest VII, the rigid structure beats out the temptations of desire, a lesson the father attempts to pass on to the child, who naturally rebels. Maribel sneaks out at night. Prince Kiefer runs away and settles down with someone his father would disapprove of. The main character of 7 explores ruins he was told not to go near, and they eventually rebel against even God himself. And here's where the shift happens, where suddenly the main characters do not represent the father, but the child. where the lessons to learn and the revelations made are from the perspective of the parent to their child. 7's ultimate contribution to our story lies in the ending. The main character, despite the influence of his friends and his rebellious attitude, always returns home and joins the family business. The father, having become an authority figure, represented by the omnipotent forces in the story, is essentially making a stubborn point. Rebel all you want, live your youth against the grain, denounce me and the things I'm telling you, eventually you'll see it my way. Arrogance comes back in a major way. Before history can repeat itself, however, we see tiny cracks of doubt, of remorse. The God of 7 turning out to be a villain in disguise, Prince Kiefer's father understanding his son's decision, the newfound independence and freedom many characters earn in 7's extensive tale. These parallels culminated into a rocky relationship between father and child, marked by awkward conversations and heated moments. Dragon Quest VIII expands on this relationship. It questions the motives of the father, shown in the many ways the narrative's parental figures fail to understand the plight of their children and the problematic behaviors they are unknowingly subjecting them to. King Clavius's failure to raise his son out of being a spoiled brat, Domenico's total mistreatment of David, and Jessica's tenuous relationship with her mother. It is both an acknowledgement of the father's mistakes and an acceptance that a parent's responsibility to their child is not to ensure they are better off, successful, or protected from their own mistakes. A parent's responsibility to their child is ensuring that they are happy.
Old obligations matter not one jot. What matters is being able to live a full and happy life.
And in line with our takeaway from 8, it's also the child's own discovery of companions and like-minded individuals pursuing similar interests. Less a rebel and now simply their own person old enough to choose for themselves, they've grown to learn a new definition of family. Perhaps realizing their mistakes, seeing their child grown up into their own person, fearing the loss of their connection, or a little bit of all three, the father seeks forgiveness in Dragon Quest IX. 9, where a home is broken and its inhabitants scattered, where a mentor, thinking he knows better, lashes out at his pupil and ultimately sacrifices himself to save their life, where potential figures throughout the narrative apologize to their children for their ignorance, where the Celestrians, those otherworldly beings with a superior attitude that watch over silly mortals, ascend to heaven, understanding that the humans they coddled are perfectly capable of protecting themselves. Dragon Quest IX is about the father admitting he was wrong, about the child struggling to emerge from the shadow of their parents. The similarities in how parties are structured between 9 and 3, as well as the multiplayer components reinforcing the union of people, certainly do this metaphor a lot of favors. And rather than let the child struggle, the father steps aside. The shadow is gone, and finally the two stand side by side in the light. 9 symbolizes the end of their tumultuous relationship, with the father choosing to accept that their child was now an adult in their own right. The liberation of expectations being removed, and the admittance of mistakes having been made, the two can now support one another, communicate with one another, and express the love they share. Then something happens in Dragon Quest X. I don't know what happens. I haven't played it, but something does, I guess. Dragon Quest has always been about family. But this entire series, all of its wisdoms, all of its lessons, all the takeaways I've ever pulled from it, it's not just made up stories. This is a life told through the ages. And Dragon Quest XI marks that final baton pass between two people as they look back on their history together. They ask, what do we do with our mistakes? With the regrets we carry with us, with the things that have happened and wish we could take back? How do we stop the past from controlling the way we think about the future? What do we do now? You accept it. Here's a big old disclaimer. Spoilers related specifically to Sylvando ahead, and most importantly, I am not well versed in what proper representation of LGBTQ+ people in media looks like, but Sylvando's sexuality and gender expression are important to his character arc, which is important to what 11 is trying to get at. I'm going to do my best, but if what I portray as solid representation turns out to not be the case, please tell me. It's important to me that I'm corrected when I'm wrong about something, and if you correct me, other people will be able to see that correction too. It takes a good amount of time before we learn more about Sylvando's past, but there are a few context clues sprinkled about here and there. He avoids the town of Puerto Valor like the plague and has a deep connection to the Knight's Pledge. Explore Puerto Valor enough and you learn that the town's leader, Don Rodrigo, is the Master Knight and trains squires from every other kingdom in knighthood. You also learn that Don Rodrigo had a son that left home for an unknown reason and never came back.
I knew from the second I walked into that tent that I'd found my calling. Getting up on that stage and making people happy, that was the life for me.
It's important to note that despite wanting to join the circus and become a performer, Sylvando doesn't discard the training his father gave him. He applies that training to a form of expression that better suits him. But even with his success, Sylvando is still afraid of confronting his father, and when circumstances mean having to ask for his help, he asks you to come with him to speak to Don Rodrigo once again.
Well, there's no good way of saying this. I'm petrified of seeing him. So you have to come with me. You will, won't you, darling? Oh, thank you. I knew you'd say yes.
But when they meet, their exchange isn't marked by tension or anger. Sylvando's father asks him whether or not he's accomplished what he promised.
Sorry? What are you apologizing for? Foolish boy.
Huh?
You have succeeded in making the world smile, see?
Don Rodrigo has come to understand his child and his mistake in reacting the way he did. Much like Sylvando, this metaphor is subtle in the way Wolverine is not. When you think of the traditional knight, what comes to mind? Honor, nobility, chivalry. It's a structured and rigorous life. Sylvando was raised as one. Talk like a knight, walk like a knight, act like a knight. His entire life, Sylvando was raised to fit into a certain role.
Then one day, the circus came to town. It was so fabulous. I can't even describe it. It was love at first sight.
There's an old phrase that goes, "They ran away to join the circus." Usually this implies a form of escapism, but when viewed as the onlooker, from the perspective of the person joining the circus, the phrase gains a new connotation. It's about openness and celebration of who one is. In the circus, Sylvando can be who he truly is and express himself in the way he chooses to, and in doing so bring happiness to himself and others. On the surface, knighthood brings with it this unwritten requirement of stoicism. Sylvando disagrees. He believes that the principles of knighthood can be expressed in other ways, that people who believe in or enjoy the aspects of being a knight don't have to necessarily act in the traditional means a knight usually would.
But I wasn't going to let that stop me. Oh no. This was my calling. To make the whole world happy. I would be a knight in smiling armor.
They don't have to act like Hendrik, for example, who is by all means the poster child for what a knight is quote-unquote supposed to be. Figuratively, knighthood is masculinity, and within Eleven's context is attached to a certain way of expressing it. And Sylvando challenges those ideas. Sylvando expresses his masculinity without conforming to the gender roles that have been applied to it. In this cutscene, two things are made clear. Don Rodrigo still loves Sylvando and accepts who Sylvando is, and regardless of how Sylvando chooses to express it, sees him as a knight.
Wait, Puppy, did you say knight? You still think of me as one? You have no idea how... Oh, thank you, Puppy. Thank you.
We never see the argument that led to Sylvando leaving. We don't have to. We've played through a series that captures Sylvando and Don Rodrigo's relationship, and we are now seeing the next step in it. The effort to understand and empathize with what our loved ones go through. The resolve to stand up to someone with the hopes of reconciling, but ready to face ever more adversity. These two are the best example of Dragon Quest XI's message, but we see similarities in the Sultan of Gallopolis and Prince Faris. When Faris comes clean about his schemes, the Sultan forgives him and blames himself for placing undue pressures on him.
Faris, look at me. The burden that was placed upon you, it was more than any boy could be expected to bear. It is I who must apologize, not you. But rest assured that I have learned my lesson, I will not make the same mistake again.
When Eric confronts Dirk, they have a conversation and hash things out.
Then I used the cash to open up the shop here and poured all my profits into bribing the guards up at the castle so they'd let you escape.
Now that you mention it, I did think it was weird they never tossed my cell the whole time I was digging that hole.
Two emotions are felt throughout the entire narrative: compassion and forgiveness. Everything leads up to one important message.
Don't waste your time bearing grudges. Live life with love in your heart. Always saw me right. Bye now.
The decisions you make, things out of your control, things you've done and said, you accept they can never be taken back. That no matter what, there's always going to be another moment in your life you wish you'd handled better. That had things been different, you might not have found the wonderful people in your life, or the resolve to embrace who you truly were, or have helped someone important to you discover that strength within themselves. You have to accept those things and face every new challenge head on. The past can inform you, but not dictate your future. And even if you could go back to do things differently, that too would be another irreversible decision with more consequences, sometimes worse consequences. There's no way of telling how changing the past can affect your future. Either way, you have to live with the what-ifs and what would-have-beens, with hope that things will turn out all right and the compassion to bring that hope to those around you. With the responsibility of being in the present, the past being a distant memory, and the future just out of reach. From the day we are born to the day we die, we all live within the echoes of an elusive age. Nailed it! That's why I'm the best. Really, Dragon Quest XI is essentially a culmination of 30 years of the franchise, so various generations really came together to wholeheartedly put all their heart and soul into this work to bring it to life. That is evident throughout. The opening shot, the little symbols and subtle plot elements, the return of some of the best mechanics and features all polished up and tweaked to work together. It's like playing Dragon Quest's greatest hits, except a lot of it is still brand new and built with love and care. This mixture of new and old coming together to create a wonderful beginning that honors decades of work done by all kinds of people is a landmark. Dragon Quest XI being this combination of peaceful conclusion and powerful new starting point doesn't just make it an entry in Dragon Quest, it is Dragon Quest. It is everything this series stands for. It's my new favorite Dragon Quest. If you're going to play one, play this one. And all of that is Dragon Quest. There's a line from Uchikawa about his favorite part of modern game development. Part of it goes, aside from surprising people, I want to focus on the ways we connect people together through games. It's not in exactly the way he's probably envisioned it, but this series changed my life when I was growing up, and again after playing through all of it for these retrospectives. It began as an experiment to see if I could do it, and even though I kind of knew it gained traction over time, not a single bone in my body expected the size of the response it got, not one cell in my brain thought I'd improve so much as a creator because of it, or that I'd meet so many different, wonderful people and experience things I only ever joked about being a part of. I've gone on cross-country road trips to conventions with people I used to stare at from afar and tell myself not to entertain the idea of meeting. I've been lucky to call them my friends, and even luckier to have their respect. I find myself at the center of a community full of wonderful, unique people who share a common interest in the things I love. I've made friends that I don't think I'll ever forget or want to lose anytime soon. There isn't a day I don't wake up to more comments and messages from all of you, eager to share with me your stories about Dragon Quest and how much you like one particular entry. Some of you have even started playing the series because of my videos. I even like the comments telling me how wrong I am about Dragon Quest VI. Oh, those are my favorites. Some of you have colorful ways of expressing disagreement. And even still, I get comments about making someone's day a little better or how a father and his son watch these retrospectives together. I wanted to find myself and leave a mark, however small, in a space I grew fond of, and you helped me do both those things. Thank you. Thank you for validating me. Thank you for being here and for continuing to be here. I'd be a worse person without you. Oh, I told myself I wasn't gonna cry. Until we can get our hands on a copy of 10 that's in English and lets me play the online content without being banned from the servers, it's time to put Dragon Quest on the shelf. We might dust it off once in a while to take a look at some of those spin-offs. I'd love to cover Dragon Quest monsters at some point, but I don't necessarily want to be the Dragon Quest guy. Now that we're done with the main line, I think it's time to look at another series. In fact, I've already started. Our next set of retrospectives is on the Yakuza franchise, complete with fancy new branding and an inspired name that, I'm pretty proud of. But Dragon Quest will always hold a special place in my heart. If it hasn't already, I hope one day it will for you too. And when it does, I hope you find your own takeaway and your own special meaning from its story. Until next time, my name is GC, and thank you from the bottom of my heart for questing with me.